Hi, welcome to Take Two, the podcast. Brian Mullahy, Greg Hughes, Jim Dabakis. Thanks for being with us. We have a lot to cover today. Session just ended. First, taxes. Will there be a special session going forward? The governor says there will. Lawmakers say there will, but they couldn't get it done this time. Will there be a special session?
Let me jump in, Heidi. Oh, wait, it's not Heidi. What happened, Jim? Look what happened. Heidi takes vacations, I guess. She's getting soft. We're here every week, right? Anyway, fun to do the show with you, Brian.
Likewise.
You're a staple in the political scene up at the Capitol Hill and Utah politics. Look, I want to commend the House. What the public might not know is that this structural imbalance has been it's been a coming dilemma, and it's not just the House that knows and understands this is a problem that needs to be tackled, but you do have a clear understanding by the Senate and even the governor's office. But you didn't hear much from the Senate or the governor's office during this session.
Senate seemed to pull back, didn't seem to be as enthusiastic as the House was about a tax cut and tax restructuring.
So what I learned being out of side of politics and outside the legislature for the first time in 16 years is that I don't know how many people are even deeply aware about the session and what's happening. And so if you hear key words like record surplus, tax cuts, and then you hear new taxes that no one's ever collected before, and
creates
businesses
confusion
that have to collect and remit, and then people paying them. I think it left the public at large completely confused as to what the situation or concern was. And if you don't have an I think only, and I hate to say this, my colleagues would be mad at me, but the bully pulpit that is the strongest and clearest to communicate to the public is our governor. And if the executive branch is not directly engaging with the public to explain the heavy lift that the legislature, I think, is willing to do, I think that was doomed to fail.
Did the governor drop the ball?
You know what? I think he tried. I know his staff was supportive of the reform, but I think that in hindsight being 2020, there has to be, and you asked the question, is there going to be a special session? If the governor does not engage directly with the public and explain the challenge that lies before us, I don't think it's worth doing. I don't think you can do that heavy lift as a legislative branch in the absence of leadership with the executive branch.
So the governor has not played strong enough.
What is this? Is a filibuster going over here again on the right. He'll just keep going, Brian.
I will, Jim. I'm trying to keep. We got 30 minutes. I'm trying to keep you from talking.
Debacle is what you think this was.
Look, this was a crisis in the mind of Republican legislators. And what is their idea of a crisis? We have, how do we deal with this? We have $1.1 billion in the education fund.
It's a crisis.
That's a crisis. Oh my goodness, it's a crisis. We got
there are other
That's
things
why
that
the governor
fund
works.
Education.
Bull.
Okay.
Utah is 50th in spending on education. And this whole Republican has been, we're going to give all these tax breaks to corporations, and then money's going to flow into the education fund, and then we can fund education. Now look what happened. Finally, we got $1.1 billion in the education fund, and what do you want to do? It's a structural imbalance. All that money has to go. Bull! I got an easy solution to this crisis. Leave the $1.1 billion where it's supposed to be constitutionally in the education fund, and then let's run state government other ways.
So, that was very vague on the end side of that.
For example, we throw $600 million a year into a welfare for roads. So let's put the gas tax up to equal the cost of
educators,
roads.
though, I talked to the state superintendent of public instruction yesterday. She seems happy with
it. They are bought off.
4% increase in the WPU. AFT seemed happy about it yesterday, etc. Educators generally seem to think that the education budget
There's
this year
Stockholm
is good.
syndrome.
So Stockholm
We're still
syndrome,
50th in spending.
Who's buying them off?
You know what? The legislature. The legislature goes to those superintendents and says, you keep your mouth shut and you smile or else.
Brian, this national stat, when you have more children per taxpayer, which we have more children per taxpayer in the state of Utah than any other state. We are a young state, so your tax base is not going to be as robust for a state average worker of 29 years old versus states that have an older population and what that income and tax would be. And lastly, property tax is the engine for education in almost every other state. Look at a state like Utah where over 65% of the land is not taxable. It's not revenue generating. And so you combine those issues, to get to the ranking that Jim talks about. But what he's not talking about, and what you just noted was, in the 4 years I was Speaker, we put over $1 billion new dollars into public education, which is significant. And it put our teachers at a higher pay.
50th.
And I'm going to tell you that we've been putting serious priority and funding into public education. No one's saying the job's not finished there, but you still have a growing population. So your commute times are getting slower every day. We have an aging water system. We have a Health and Human Services service that's growing by the day. We just passed Medicaid expansion, and there's additional general fund dollars that will be needed there. Outside of the income tax, which again is where Al Gore didn't have a lockbox, this is the real lockbox. This only goes to education. General fund money has to pay for all the things the state does.
There's your crisis. Take money out of the education fund. You know, all this, we have too many children or whatever. You know what? There are children. We can't say, well, there's too many of you can't eat. We are creating the ground where our young people are simply not going to be able to compete in the next generation, because this generation refuses to hold up to its historic responsibility to put Utah kids
we are not on the wrong side on this. Brian, this is crossfire here. You hear how this is going back and forth. You can't get a word in, but I'm telling you, we're not at odds.
I will. Go ahead, though.
Yeah, we're not at odds on the priority of children and getting them ready for the future and workforce and all of that. There's other things going on in this state that the funds and the general fund needed to do it. It is imbalanced.
To your point, the Senate did pass a resolution this session which would take money, or allow the state, as I understand it, to take money from the income tax fund, which is solely devoted to education, and use it for social services and other programs. Educators don't like that idea. It didn't get any further than that, but that's an issue. They're talking about a money shift.
They want to, that's this whole machination that they're talking about, this imbalance is, how do we get money out of the education fund? Fundamentally, it is a bet against the state of Utah. We rank #1 in roads, but we rank 50th in education funding. Totally wrong priorities.
Can I just say one last point? If you look at the job reports coming out of U.S. Department of Labor for this last month of February, they speak for themselves. Services, professional services, those jobs are growing like crazy. Retail jobs are shrinking. General fund mostly comes from sales tax. If you see people spending more of their expendable income on services, we don't have a tax system that matches how people spend those dollars. And I think if you look at some of the key issues of public education, like making sure at-risk children have had breakfast and they are not going to school hungry, some of the things with health care that do impact our children and at-risk kids, you can make a strong argument that if you have a robust income tax and we want that educational experience to be good for these kids, why not look at some of those income tax dollars to help those children be able to be fed and have good health care while they're in school, so that they can take the greatest advantage of the opportunities
they don't want to rub that education fund to pay kids schools.
No,
they want to rob that fund so they have plenty of money to give to energy solutions and all their favorite giant corporations that are getting huge subsidies in the tunes of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. This would all end, even your bucket imbalances, if you would just make everybody pay their fair share of taxes, including the corporate buddies of so many Republicans.
Food tax. There is talk about increasing the sales tax on food now. One state senator told me this would basically do the same thing that the bill that was proposed and failed would do. It would shift money. You could have an income tax cut. Will sales tax on food go up?
Yes, that's going to be part of their plan in August. They can't wait. It's been out there, this discount on food. Can you imagine a more regressive tax than putting sales tax on food? Just leave that alone. I got $700–800 million ready to give you in corporate tax cuts, or just slightly increase the tax on people making $500,000 a year from 5 to 7%, the way it was before they cut it. $322 million. There's a lot of ways to balance these buckets, but Republicans only want it balanced on the backs of poor people, of working class Utahns. It's not
your
good.
response to that?
Well, Jim's talking about class warfare, and that's a great Full Employment Act for tax attorneys and accountants. When you talk about raising taxes on the most wealthy, they will find ways and deductions and ways to avoid those taxes. So it sounds great, but I don't think practically it brings dollars into the door. You have a tax. All food is taxed, but it is a local tax. We took the sales or the state portion of sales tax off of food a number of years ago, maybe 10, 11 years ago. So we used to have a tax on food. It would not be different than what we had done in the past if they restored the state portion of the sales tax. There's already a sales tax on food. It would just be the state portion. But I'd have to see the numbers. We looked at this 2 years ago, or a year, when I was in the session and as speaker, we looked at this. I didn't see the revenue that it would generate to justify kind of the impact it would have on the state. So I, after looking at the data, was not convinced that was a way to go forward. But there were some deductions for those in lower income. I don't know what the plan would look like, but the one we looked at in the session, I didn't think justified the action because I didn't see the change in revenue being high enough.
Let's move to beer. 3.2 to 4.0. One lobbyist told me at the Capitol just yesterday or the day before, this shows that the LDS Church has lost control of alcohol policy in the state of Utah. Your response to that?
Look, they're a voice. They're a strong voice. You know, you have stakeholders in your community, and if you go to any state, you're going to have similar stakeholders that represent large portions of the population in some way or another that are going to have that input. I think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have been more transparent about those concerns. I think it's been good. I know they get a lot of criticism for it, but I think there was an era when they did engage, but it was in a more quiet way. The public wasn't as well aware. I think the public is more aware, which I think is the transparency is a good thing. Yeah, it's not a scenario where they just tip a hat and everybody reacts. I think that's been the accusation. The fact that these negotiations went the way they did kind of kills that beautiful theory. And I think that, again, everything in the legislature and the political process is a negotiation. The conspiracy that Jim's about to share, this proved it wrong.
If everybody else could go up to the Capitol and weigh in on legislation, shouldn't the LDS Church be able to do it?
Of course. My problem comes in when the LDS Church sometimes gets into a political boxing ring and then doesn't understand. You're in the political ring, people are going to take a swing at you. So you got to expect that. So as long as they're there and they understand you're on the podium at church, fine. But you get in the political ring and you start talking about people's medical marijuana or other things, you know what? People are going to take swings at you. Yeah, look, this turned out okay. The compromise game.
You're okay with the 4.0?
Yeah.
You're okay with the 4.0. Yeah. Abortion, 18 weeks gestational age. It would ban most abortions after that. Utah has gone a different direction than other states. New York, primarily. I noted in the Senate, it was strictly a straight party vote. Republicans voted in favor of the abortion ban after 18 weeks. Democrats voted against it. There's going to be a lawsuit.
Just quickly here, this is pure politics. This is against the Supreme Court ruling. This is everybody getting up and going, I can say this. What is going to happen? This is another message bill, and it's going to cost Utahns millions of dollars to run into court. There's already 3 or 4 states that are there. The sensible thing to do would be to let the other states spend their money in court, but no, but the legislature has to make their point.
But they're going to do that. They're already going to do that.
Yeah,
and so there will be different lawsuits on different tracks. Pro-life groups say, no, this is about having more or fewer abortions in the state of Utah and protecting unborn kids.
Yep, that's right. Look, I'm going to give you a broader look. The 72 Supreme Court ruling, much of that was based on the viability of a fetus and where life began, where that baby or fetus could survive outside of the mother. This is 2019. That's changing. But what you see in the abortion debate is it's not just you hear bills like you do in Utah about, well, if the gestation period is longer, that baby actually could survive earlier than it did back in 72. And so there is this argument that that child's life is worth preserving. But you see the other side of this pendulum going as well. You see Democrats.
Some people say every child's life is worth preserving.
But you're seeing after a child has been born, the ability to end that child's life. And that debate, I think that pendulum swinging out that side is what you see and why you see those that are pro-life realizing they've got to be stronger in their voice, because we're not even talking the last trimester anymore. There's actually a straight-faced debate about children being born and immediately being aborted or killed. I don't know what I don't even know what word you use after they're born.
Infanticide is what some people use.
Yes,
and the Virginia governor's
but
comments.
those are real debates.
This has nothing to do with this.
It's a pendulum, Jim.
It's a pendulum schmendulum. What this is, there's already 3 states that have that going to the Supreme Court, the same issues about when viability comes. Utah wanted to get in there so they could score political points and cost the taxpayers a lot of money. The case is going to be heard, and that's the only way it's going to change.
It's going to the Supreme Court is what I think both sides say.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to have lawsuits in different court jurisdictions. One court jurisdiction could uphold, one court jurisdiction could strike down, and so you're going to have multiple tracks here that could go to the Supreme Court. All right, Medicaid expansion. They got it done earlier. Big difference between the way that the tax bill was handled and the Medicaid bill was handled. Why was the legislature able to get Medicaid done so quickly when tax bill couldn't happen?
Look, I think there was obviously a broader consensus on wanting to honor the will of the people, cover people that were not covered. If you're a single adult and you're making $12,000 a year or less, you have coverage now that you didn't have prior to the vote of Proposition 3. The legislature wanted to honor that. However, there's other constitutional obligations that the legislature has, like balancing the budget. So they needed to make sure that how they did it. We're talking 100,000 people, because not just single adults are in these circumstances. You have people that have households as well. But all combined, you're talking 100,000 people in our state. It's about 0.033% of the population. Because it's a lower number, this is a more theoretical discussion for most of the people. I mean, it's not for the people it impacts. But when you talk about tax reform and collecting it and having small businesses that have to now collect and remit quarterly and people have to pay it, you're talking about a far broader impact to Utahns in their daily lives. And so I think that those 2 issues, while critically important, I think there was more consensus on the Medicaid and how we get it right and honor the Proposition 3 vote, and it was impacting people that I don't think people themselves were or knew. And I think that the tax reform impacts a lot of people, and there wasn't as strong of a consensus.
House Speaker says Medicaid's going to cover as many people as Prop 3 would. Do you agree?
No. Look, the state made a deal with the devil because the political ideologues are on their shoulders, and they're always talking to the wacky fringes in the Republican Party. This makes no sense. You take a look at all the states around us, now Idaho, you talk about New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada. Just shut up and take full Medicaid expansion. That's what Utah ought to do. It's $800 million a year. We pay 10%, so it's $80 million. We raise sales tax. The people voted. The people are not stupid. They got it. They want it. But the legislature, okay, what do you want? Listening to all the little fringes, and they had to have a Utah plan, which, by the way, the big feature we have to get is special permission from Washington. And what is that permission? We want the right to cap the number of people that will get these benefits in Utah, and we'll decide who they'll be. Why would we do that? It's a 90-10 split. These are sick people. That's what Utah is waiting for, the right to boot certain Utahns off, and they're ripping up $800 million. They're paying on a 30-70 split instead of a 90-10. A crazy man wouldn't make this deal.
Other states, as you mentioned, don't have constitutional provisions that require a balanced budget, as Utah does. And so some say that in the future, Medicaid expansion under Prop 3 would have actually cost the state more money, and people might have to be kicked off anyway.
Why don't they say that when they give Energy Solutions big money, or $70 million in sales tax revenues, or offer hundreds of millions of dollars?
There's a tax increase on Energy Solutions this year, but I will just say this. Everything in the budget is capped. By the word cap, you mean the legislature appropriates an amount of money, and that's all they have, because they don't print money like the federal government. Every line item has a cap, so to speak, because these are the dollars that the legislature budgets. If the costs go above that, there's only so much money. So that is what they're saying with Medicaid expansion. If you put this special 10% of whatever the cost is, whether it's 10% for a Bentley, 10% for a Hyundai, those numbers actually are different. And if you have to make sure that the dollars spent are the same, it has to come out of something.
We're talking
you have to treat it the same way every line item in a budget is treated.
Talking less than $100 million for a budget that's $19 billion. This is a small item. That's a bad excuse. These people are in desperate need. Other states take it. This is just a chip on your shoulder against poor people. That's what it is.
We've talked about energy solutions already. Hotter waste could be coming to the state as a result of a bill that passed during the session. Your take on hotter waste?
Letting this depleted uranium into the state is a big, big problem. And if it's going to come, if we're going to take all of this depleted uranium from all around the country and bring it here because it's safer here than anywhere else, we should be taxing the crap out of them. And we're not. We added a little teeny tax, which just made up for the tax rebate we gave them last year. This is, if it's got to come, and I don't think it should, because this stuff lasts millions of years.
It gets hotter over time, people say.
Yeah, it gets hotter, like me, over
30,000 years, boy, you start to see the temperature rise. 30,000 years, okay? So
I'm saying tax it, tax it, tax it, tax it if it's going to be here. Why else do we want it here?
Okay, but depleted uranium, the governor stopped shipments of depleted uranium from coming to the state at one point years ago. Regulators are going to have a decision about this. Why move forward with the bill now?
So let's just, it sounds daunting, depleted uranium, but what I don't, so we have different classifications. This is total government speak, and I wasn't in this session, so I don't have to get rid of all the acronyms in government speak, but here's the thing. Class A waste is all this still is. B and C waste, which is hotter waste, would be like the glowing light in your smoke detector. That's actually too hot to put in energy solutions. This depleted uranium is not as hot as that. It has a scary name, but it's Class A. Yeah, in 30 years it might start to get hotter. But here's the issue. I have heard from Jim's friends, when you talk about climate change, when you talk about carbon, burning carbon and everything else, that the whole world, China might be at a high rate, India might be going crazy, but in Utah we should be ending this whole addiction to carbon and doing our part to help the planet. My question to Jim and those environmentally sensitive and people, we all love the environment. I'm not saying that we don't, but I find it inconsistent to want to create policy to address climate change in little old Utah for the world when we know that this country's making waste. It needs to be safely stored for the benefit of this environment. You don't want to put it in Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania or Ohio where the water table's 5 feet under your feet. You want a place like Clive, Utah that has 0 water table. It's the safest place for this country to put this kind of waste because we make it. We make this waste. It doesn't just disappear. If we want to be environmentally responsible, why isn't this part and parcel with good stewardship?
Let's take your argument. Take it for a moment, all right? This is the best place in the world that needs to come here. The citizens of Utah are making a sacrifice. Who knows what can happen in transport? Who knows what happens in a few hundred years? There's serious waste. Tax it. Don't subsidize it. Stericycle.
There are taxes on it.
Bull. They are little teeny taxes. The new taxes that they're talking about don't even make up for this special break we gave them last session. I'm saying tax, tax, tax. Make them pay for our school kids to be here.
Budget. $19 billion this year. I remember when I'm dating myself. Jim, you were in town. You weren't quite here yet. But back in 1988, the state budget was about $1 billion.
Yes.
Now it's $19 billion. We have not had a we haven't increased population to the same degree. You could argue that my salary and other people's salary hasn't gone up 19 times since then. So is it still a conservative state?
It is. I'll tell you, it was $7 billion my first year in 2003, and now it's $19 billion. So I've watched with my own eyes. We are one of the fastest growing states in the country. The Western United States are the fastest growing states in the country. This is all about infrastructure, Brian. Infrastructure, what you pay. Look at Utah. When they built the reservoirs, when they created this water system that even allowed for Salt Lake County to grow to the extent it did, at the time they were planning that was over-engineered, too expensive, and simply didn't match the population living in Utah. But this has been a pioneer state, and there has been an acknowledgement that the population has been growing since day one. Those decisions made 70 years ago, 100 years ago. Even look at the state capitol. When that was built, it must have been ridiculous in size and scope compared to the size of that of the state.
No question.
But look what look at that building today and how appropriate, and we've even added to it since. There isn't an infrastructure investment that this state hasn't made where we're not thanking our lucky stars later. There's criticism at the time that we're doing now. Much of that growth you see are for roads, transportation, multimodal, roads, rail. You have water, aging water systems where the federal government isn't playing the role they used to when they help finance reservoirs and those things. You've got ready workforce. Jim just mentioned it. I've got a daughter in college. I fundamentally don't know that she'll be able to afford to stay and live in this state and have a career. That is something that's hitting my home in terms of my concerns. Those are real, but you can't just take the population and the circumstances today. You've got to understand that these are the things that are growing and coming upon us, and that's why you see some of those, the budgets as large as they are and the investments coming in, because the challenge we have is that we are a growing state economically, but also by population.
Okay, so it's still a conservative state fiscally. When you have when you have a budget increase 19 times over 30 years.
Greg, the speaker's right. I mean, we do have infrastructure. I think the
Could
debate...
you say that again one more time? I love the sound of that. That just had a ring to it, Brian. Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
We do have that.
Oh,
That's
you.
That's recorded.
Okay, get that on the news. Put that in breaking news. You got to interrupt your news at breaking news.
But
we can just drop in that sound bite anytime we need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, continue.
But look at this legislature. They get a D- for not helping pollution. The governor asked for $100 million. They're there with 23 on not well thought out.
Well, Patrice Aaron thought maybe
one-times.
yesterday, maybe up to $29 million, which is more than the state has ever spent.
But it wasn't
on clean
well
air.
thought out. I mean, if you're going to spend $29 million, the governor's sitting around writing his speech and go, yeah, let's put $100 million in, and then everybody scurries around. You know, that was...
You got your bossy idling
dithering.
bill. I can't idle in my driveway anymore on the phone.
You're never idle anyway, Hughes. You're always doing something. Not a penny for what I think is, not just in Salt Lake City, but all over, an astonishingly important issue, and that is affordable housing. And the legislature, to them, that doesn't matter. As long as we get money to corporations, that's okay then, and give them tax breaks. That's an issue. There was talk about putting $1 billion bonding package together, like we did a couple of years ago, for more roads. What about housing, affordable housing? People can't live in the state of Utah all over. And the state is just going, oh, let the market will figure it out. No, the market's not figuring it out.
It keeps
and
going
the
up.
state
It
needs
keeps going up.
to
Even
be
with
there.
higher interest rates, it was still going up.
There are concerns on that front. There are. And
Right, we agree on that.
Well, there was a bill as well to encourage, incentivize communities to try to plan for more affordable housing. I think that is, California's talking about suing communities if they don't provide affordable housing. Utah's taking a softer approach, but affordable housing is a huge issue.
People have to
At the end of the day, though, this is the rub. It's what you just described. It's hard for the state to say to these different cities and jurisdictions, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. There has to be a partnership. There has to be a better understanding that growth is coming, and it comes really more from the state itself. You have more kindergartners entering public schools than you have seniors graduating every single year. It's not stopped. The growth continues. There's great migration into this state, corporate expansion, relocation, people coming in because of the prosperity, the economic times. But you have the state still growing mostly from within. So growth is happening. How do we manage it? It's hard when someone says, look, younger workforce, they don't mind living in an apartment or renting because they don't see themselves sitting in one place for 30 years
But they also can't afford a place. They can't afford to buy.
Yeah, but the
afford
issue is
apartments
this.
anymore.
Well, you don't even have planning commissions and city councils that will allow for the multifamily development near your transportation modes of freeways,
Greg,
or light rail or commuter rail.
Let me ask you this.
That's a problem. And there's a disconnect going on between our local jurisdictions and this state issue that we're confronting.
The state really, and I get a kick out of it because the legislators think they are the fulcrum of all intelligence. The federal government is all wrong and the cities and counties are all wrong. We, the legislature, we know all and we have all power. And they just send forth.
He always forgets he was a senator.
Yeah, that's
last
right.
year,
Yeah,
okay?
that's right.
Okay, you cannot outlaw plastic bags, Park City, because we know better and we don't want your
That
local
bill
standards.
didn't happen. Didn't happen.
And we have, you cannot put calories on menus or force restaurants in your town. You may not do this. Or if you want to speak out against Bears Ears, you must come to us before you can speak out. That one passed. What are they going to do? Put the city council in jail?
It's good communication, Jim.
So
it's just communication.
I'm saying, why, if this legislature is so all-encompassing, why can't they sit down with cities and say, you're going to think about affordable housing?
Now, you know what? Cities bristle at this, and you know that from being at the legislature as well. If the legislature tries to tell cities what to do, why is the legislature telling us what to do? And the state says, why is the federal government telling us what to do? You didn't like it.
Put a carrot in there.
Yeah.
Put a carrot in there.
Incentives. I think incentives. I think the way forward, and I've heard this discussed. There's all these cities in these jurisdictions. They love their local control, but look, when you have on the west side of Utah Lake all those houses approved and developed, and all that new population out there, then they come to the state after the fact and say, "You only have a one lane going either way, state road there. How dare you?" State didn't know you were going to put a zillion homes on the west side of Utah Lake. It wasn't in the programming. If we want this to be done right, if they, in all these cities and counties, need the partnership of the state for road infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, if we're not working together on affordable housing issues and solving some of these problems collectively, I think the state can say, look, you can do what you want, but if you want the state's participation on infrastructure, we got to start talking closely and planning together. That's what has to happen, and I think you're right. It has to be through a carrot.
Worst thing the legislature did this session?
Killed the conversion therapy bill. So many young LGBTQ kids are going to suffer, and some will die in this stunt by the far right. It was a very grim day. That was a worst moment.
Worst thing the legislature did this session?
Hindsight's 20/20. So I'm not criticizing my colleagues who I love, but I will tell you that the tax reform that was proposed, and with the limited time of a session and how generational the change and the restructuring would be, there needed to be some step-up time. And I think that that issue was not for the faint of heart. I think the House showed that they were ready for that challenge, but I don't think you had a Senate or executive branch that had that same level of commitment. And because of that, it didn't succeed. And I think that there's some pretty upset members of the public right now that it even was discussed to the degree it was. That is an issue that I regret how it rolled out.
Best thing the legislature did this session?
The best thing the legislature did this session was remind Utahns how out of control the legislature is.
That is not a best thing.
That doesn't sound like legislation to me. That doesn't sound like, yeah.
It's the best thing because voters are really got it this time when they went with the initiatives and this anarchy of presenting a budget, this massive change like in the last 3 weeks and smoking it through. It's time for a new legislature.
Best thing the legislature did this session?
It's the other side of the coin. I think that you saw issues like our structural tax imbalance that were finally brought to light. I think that has to continue at a higher rate and a far higher level of communication with the public at large. But they showed that they are still not playing the same politics you're seeing around the country, kicking the can down the road, avoiding tough decisions. You saw some and they were controversial, and it did raise the hair on people's necks. But you know what? We get such a brand of do nothing, status quo, partisan politics around the rest of the country. I thought it said a lot about our legislature that they were ready to talk about very uncomfortable things but critical issues facing the state, and I think they showed leadership. I thought it was a profile in courage this session.
Jim Dabakis, Greg Hughes. Thank you.
Thanks.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for watching and listening to this podcast. I'm Brian Mullahy. Have a wonderful day.